Great. Okay, so hello everybody. My name is Helen Joannides. That's me in my natural habitat. I do public programs and outreach at the Western Cape Archives in Cape Town, South Africa, where it is now just after 6 p.m. on a chilly winter's evening. So I work at a provincial government archive. That's the building. It used to be a prison completed by the British in 1858. And you can, next slide, please. We have our documents span about a 400-year history, more than 45 kilometers of records, including records around enslaved people spanning the 17th, 18th, and a little bit of the 19th century. Okay, next slide. So today I'm going to share a program created for grade 10s called Unboxing the Past, Researching Cape Slavery. Okay, next slide. So what I wanted to do in this is share my nerdy archivist excitement about some of the primary sources on enslaved people that I was encountering, and to also tap into some real world skills. So critical thinking and historical research skills to give kids a kind of a taste of what a historian would do. So also wanting it to be useful to teachers, something working with primary source materials often hard to do alone. And this program also links into their grade 10 history content for our national curriculum. And they're also required to do a research assignment in grade 10. So it can be a stepping stone or skills development for that assignment as well. We also wanted it to be replicable. So it's delivered by us, but the teachers are actively involved. So it's kind of modeled for them. And all the source material is left with the teachers, either with a link to a Google Drive or on a memory stick, so they can then use it the way we have in future or in other ways. And it also becomes sustainable for us, so we increase our footprint a little bit. But what I wanted for it was to be accessible in a realistic way for grade 10s, especially in a South African context, which we can kind of talk a bit more about. But so this program is kind of my answer to some of those. Okay, next slide. So the kids either come to us at the archives, or we can go to the schools because sometimes transport is an issue. And they come for the morning. We break them into groups using color-coded puzzle pieces. So 7 groups of 6, we can do about 40 odd more, sometimes at a time. And we provide an overview of the program and the archives, and also some of the sources on enslaved people that we have. Next slide. So the first activity is my very crude puzzle of doing historical research. And basically they put it together and they realize that it's not a neat, seamless process. There's overlap, there's bits missing. You start here and you end there. And to kind of get them thinking about being comfortable with sometimes quite an uncomfortable process. So we then get them to sort the terms that historians have to deal with, and they do a little bit of a peer teaching activity to refresh their memory about what those things mean. And okay, next slide. They then start to do a little bit of an ordering activity about the historical research process. So the 10 steps, but there's a lot of discussion because it's a messy process. It's not linear, it's not neat. It goes back and forth. So they put them in order, but then we have quite a lot of disagreement, which is cool. And we show how this program that they're going to do now starts to simulate this research process. Okay, next slide. So each group gets a box of sources, mostly primary sources, copies of primary sources, but some secondary as well. And they need to, in their small groups, create a draft presentation and a poster answering the question, what do we know about enslaved people at the Cape? So what they don't know at first is that each group gets curated sources that have a slightly different evidence. So they do come up with different presentations and posters. So then we have a discussion about that. Each group does get some of the same sources just to provide a broad context for the period in history. Okay, next slide. So their goal is really to organize and analyze the sources, evaluate them, record evidence, plan how to approach it, what's their theme going to be. Okay, next slide. And kind of decide how they're going to put it all together. So we give them an hour, and we do scaffold it in terms of breaking up that hour and labeling the primary and secondary sources, and we'll also put some questions on the sources to get them going. Next slide. So we also circulate and help out and really stress that it's process of a product. The poster is not the thing, and that they must feel a bit overwhelmed. That is okay. They are grappling with it. Okay, next slide. So they do get a break then, and then they come back and they present their posters. And we really start to then have a discussion about those historical concepts, analyzing, applying, evaluating, and how they've kind of synthesized it all together. Okay, next slide. So these are some real life versions of what they've produced. And they are coming up with different themes because the discussion leads us to, yes, they've had different sources, but they've also made different selections and different interpretations of those sources. Okay, next slide. So the discussion as we go through, and each group, next slide, so each group presents is really key to it. And then part of it is a reflection as well about the process, the content, and the group work. So obviously they're practicing research and critical thinking skills, they're communicating and presenting and working as a team, and then they're also reflecting on the process of doing historical research. So if they're at the archives, we also take them on a behind-the-scenes tour, and they get to see some of the real original documents that they've been working with the copies of. So through that, they're also gaining a deeper appreciation of archiving as well, and as a career choice as well for history students. Okay, next slide. So this program has a pre and post program package as well, which we can talk a little bit about if anyone's interested. Okay, next slide. But what I really want to get to is kind of my reflections on the program and the process. So the challenge has really been to strike a balance between something being accessible and something being a real world task in some way. So obviously parts of it are not real, the staging of it, the labeling of it, the scaffolding of it, the cutting out and annotating on primary sources, the time constraints, it's all not real. But we try and make explicit what are the real parts. And the real parts are the working with the sources, the skills development, the feelings that it evokes, and the whole process. So often they find that very exciting and satisfying because it's also at a level of detail, which sometimes their history curriculum is quite high level and can be dry in that way. So they kind of really feeling like they're grappling and scratching into the past a little bit. So the other reflection is to try and make it flexible enough because, especially in our context in South Africa, we have wide variations of prior knowledge and content knowledge. And some groups do this before they've covered it in class and some groups afterwards. And we also have really varying levels of critical thinking and research skills, abilities, and also levels of English, because most people's first language is not English, and the sources are either in English or some of them are in Dutch, which obviously we've translated and transcribed, but there are those kinds of barriers to access. So, and transport is a barrier sometimes, but what we try to do is to make it flexible enough so that there is some exposure. So wherever you are, the program is meeting you there in some ways. And stronger or weaker members of the group either lead or get carried along as well. So we've also tried to make it incorporate increasing capacity for teachers in some way. So they're getting some skills as well, and also have reduced the sources depending on the group sometimes and their level of English. So my last reflection, just to end off, is that obviously here in South Africa specifically, we live with the legacy of slavery, colonialism, and apartheid that is with us still and is very fresh for a lot of people. So there is still a lot of strong emotions around some of these topics. So it is a sensitive subject. So that is also something that we try and bear in mind and facilitate a discussion with about if need be. But it also has led to a teacher workshop to kind of capacitate teachers to deal with discussions like this, constructive discussions in the classrooms. So that is the end of my bit. Thank you.
Thanks, Helen, so much for sharing that. I'm going to go on then. I'm Liz Riordan. I'm the lead outreach and instruction librarian for special collections and archives at the University of Iowa. And I oversee all of our instruction scheduling, including all of our visits that are for K-12 groups here. So I would say that since 2022, we've done 19 classes and 8 events specifically geared towards K-12 audiences, serving around 650 students. And I've been in this position now for 6 years, and I will say that the last couple of years we've seen a huge increase in K-12 folks wanting to visit that. And I would say that the increase here is partly due to the Stanley Museum of Art. They finally got a new building that opened in 2022, which is pictured here, and they opened literally next door to us. See, there we are, clear in the corner. And since then, word got out that the libraries also do K-12 events, and so we've had a lot of positive feedback from those events, and so I think word spread and people wanted to visit the Stanley on the same day and visit us. And sometimes they also want to go to the Pentecrest Museums, which is the natural history and the old Capitol Museum just up the hill from us. So I will work a lot with our GLAM, which stands for Gallery, Libraries, Archives, and Museums, partners here on campus to coordinate a lot of these visits. And while this requires some extra work on our part, to make these visits work, it's a big benefit to work with my GLAM partners for lots of reasons. We get to know our campus partners better and to see their collections, which leads to collaboration on other projects. But most importantly, these K-12 groups are often large, like 60 to 150 students, as many of you know. I see a lot of head shaking right here. So we often need each other for space because none of us have space to accommodate this large of groups. And we also need the support from each other to make this work. Now, I don't always work with the museums on campus when K-12 groups come. Some groups just want to visit the libraries, and when we're just the ones hosting, I try my best to work in the whole library so they see many departments. So I work with undergrad engagement and the main library gallery. Again, a lot of it has to do with the size of the group, and splitting them into different library spaces helps alleviate issues. But also, there are so many facets to the library that I love bringing in my colleagues to come talk to students about their areas of expertise. But today, I want to focus on some activities we have done specifically with Kirkwood Elementary. And I was approached actually by 2 graduate students who had visited special collections in their own classes, and they were part of a service learning project in the general education literature class. And the college students were going to Kirkwood Elementary along with a large group to work with 5th and 4th graders on reading and writing. And they wanted to see if it was possible to bring the students to special collections. And to me, this was a really important collaboration to be part of, and we were going to find a way to make it work. Kirkwood is a school where many students come from economically disadvantaged households, and a majority are from underrepresented communities. And I not only wanted to show these students that we are here for them as community members, and everything that we have they can come and see, but also show them that librarianship in lots of different forms is a career path that they can consider. And you all are here right now, so you understand the importance that I think that K-12 education can be really crucial in inspiring the next generation of librarians and really working on our field to grow, right? So the first year visit that we had, this was in 2022, yes, 3, something like that. The first year we did this, we decided to have an overarching focus on how images have been used to help with storytelling for centuries. So we thought this would be an eye-catching experience for them, but also accessible to a wide range of the students. Some of them who may not know English very well yet, or who might have difficulty with reading and writing. So we also set this up in the main gallery, the library gallery, and we had about 2.5 hours with the students in the morning, but we switched Stanley halfway through. So we roughly had 75 minutes with each group and then 35 kids in each group. Within the gallery, I had 3 stations set up, and we would rotate the group that we had among these stations for like 10 minutes or so, trying to get them engaged in moving because they brought a lot of energy. Station 1 was a copy of the Scroll of Frolicking Animals, or the Chojuginga, from the 12th century Japan. Here you see it in this picture here. This is a undergraduate class coming to see it, but it's the scroll that we have. This is what it looks like up close. And as you can see, some say that this is a precursor to anime. So when I said that to students, a lot of them got excited. There are no words on this scroll, so we would walk along, and I had the students tell me what they thought was happening in the scroll. And this idea was to get them to think about how stories, one image can tell lots of different stories with just one image here. Station 2 was about medieval illumination in Western Europe. So what we had on this table was a Book of Hours out and a couple copies of famous medieval works. So the Book of Hours we did have under a vitrine, but there was facsimiles that they could flip through. But then we had pieces of parchment and old paper. I had some gall nuts, lapis lazuli, other materials used to make ink, some quills and things like that. And I had actually purchased some gold leaf off of Amazon, typically used for bakers. And we tore pieces of the gold leaf off and gave them to the kids so that they could see how delicate it was to work with. And so this was kind of like a petting zoo, if you will, of materials used to make these images. They lost their minds at the gold leaf. They couldn't get enough of it. One kid was even like, I'm going to eat it the minute I gave it to him. And before I could say anything, he shoved it in his mouth. And then all the kids around him were like, I want to eat mine too. And like, luckily this gold was edible. I hadn't told them that, by the way. So the lesson here, I think, is kids will eat things that you give them. So just be careful, right? At least they didn't do it with the gall nuts. But Station 3 then was more modern picture books from the late 19th and 21st centuries, where we could talk to them about their favorite books that they had at home, and compare them to what they were seeing from maybe the early 20th century or into the 21st century. We had a lot of fun pop-up books. So then we did all these stations for like 30 to 40 minutes, and then we regrouped for this activity. And so I call it my Netflix special. And what this activity was to get the kids to really think about how one image can be interpreted in many ways, like we were doing with the scroll. And so for the setup, we had groups of 5, and there was an adult, usually a college student, with each from this class, the service project, sit with each group, right? And then we handed them out a prompt, a pencil, and a picture from this book that you see pictured here, The Mysteries of Harris Burdick. And if you don't know this, this is in our collection. This book is a part of our children's literature collection. I love this book. All it contains are these wonderful images and then one sentence, and that's it. And so each group got a different image from this book along with the sentence that it comes with. And then the prompt was, you're going to give a pitch. You're going to pitch a movie idea to Netflix using this image. Figure out the following: title, main characters, time, place, what happens at the beginning, what is the big moment in your story, so the climax, and then how does it end? And with this activity, every group had to make the pitch to me. I was Netflix and my GA that I had helping me. And we would say yes or no. Don't worry, I said yes to all of them. There was a lot of poisoning in a lot of these, but this activity was a lot of fun. Most of the kids seemed really engaged and excited to share their stories with this class. One group even wanted to reenact it for all of us, which was a bit of a disaster, but I still enjoyed it. If we had had time, I would have liked to have made the group smaller, but I wanted to make sure everyone had time to present to the class their idea. So then this year, the kids came back. And again, it was 4th and 5th graders. So many of the 5th graders had actually been here the year before as 4th graders. So I didn't want to make the same activity. When they arrived, many actually brought up last year's activity, so I knew it was a good thing. The gold was the most mentioned, obviously, but a lot of them also mentioned the Scroll of Frolicking Animals and asked if I still worked for Netflix, and I said no. So this year, we only had them at the library. We weren't splitting them up with Stanley this time. And we actually had less time because of buses needed. The buses needed to go do something else in the afternoon. So there was transportation issues, which Helen mentioned as well. That's always an issue that comes up, right? So I worked with our gallery coordinator and undergrad engagement folks to split the group up into different rooms in the library and switch. And so we switched every 35 minutes, and the gallery had a scavenger hunt for the current exhibit that was in the space. Undergrad engagement had a computer activity planned, and I was like, well, let's talk medieval bestiaries. And I was trying to use this as a catalyst to talk about the spread of knowledge during medieval times using text. So my activity started with a slideshow where I showed them actual images of medieval bestiaries and had them guess what animal it was. And I started off a bit easy. So this is a poorly drawn cat, but it progressed until we got to this, which no one got right. This is a giraffe. And I then talked to them about how information spread in medieval times, how people did a lot of guesswork based off of Greek texts and other texts, and how it was passed down, kind of like the game of telephone. And to my amazement, they still knew what the game of telephone was, which was great because in a lot of my classes, I make references and all my students look at me blankly because I'm getting old, and that's okay. But they still knew what telephone was, so you can use that. And then I asked, how does this still happen today? How does information get kind of twisted based off of an image you saw? This is me trying to get them to think about information they see online. So then next I read 3 descriptions of 3 different animals, and I didn't name what the animals were. And I did this one at a time. And so these descriptions actually came from medieval or early modern descriptions of animals, and the students had to try to draw what I was describing. And again, this helped lead them to the conversation about how ideas of belief of mythical beasts and spread of information happened at the time. So here are some of the drawings. I had described a kangaroo, a platypus, and a tiger for the third. And then what surprised me is a lot of students got frustrated drawing and just gave up, as you can see in the middle here. It surprised me how many students were actually concerned about their artistic abilities and were really hesitant to draw because they're like, I don't know how to draw antlers. And so it was a lot of me pepping them up, being like, it doesn't matter. You saw some of the medieval pictures. They didn't know how to draw either. Ha ha ha. Honestly, this activity was just okay. I think part of it is I felt rushed because of the limited times, yet the activity didn't seem to hold their interest the whole time either. And I think it's because they had a lot of sitting and listening to me talk too much. And they just wanted to draw and do what they wanted to do. And so with the first year that they came, they were moving around a lot. And I also had them more as an agent telling me what they thought when they looked at items. And here I was doing a lot of speaking. And I also had a table out with lots of books with medieval creatures or different animals depicted in them. And we had a cool selection, and they really didn't get to engage with that enough. So I feel there were some merits to this activity, but I also feel like it could have gone better and it needs to be workshopped a little bit. When it comes to 4th and 5th graders, don't let them handle anything they can't eat, is what I've learned. And also maybe make sure that they're moving enough and that they have control of the conversation at times too. I think that was something I took away from this last year as well. And that's all I've got.
That was awesome, Liz. Thank you. Both you and Helen have been racking up questions and appreciations in the chat too, which you can catch up on. Hello, everybody. My name is Blake Spitz. I'm an archivist at UMass Amherst in Western Massachusetts. And I'm going to be talking, I think you'll see some of the themes from the earlier presentations coming through in terms of getting students moving, thinking about visual materials. But my presentation is sort of focused on thinking about adapting a heavily used collection in our repository, the W.B. Du Bois papers, and how we adapt use for that for younger learners. So I can do the next slide. So just really quickly, I work in a library. This Tower Library is named after Du Bois, son of Massachusetts Du Bois, but really one of the most prominent thinkers of the 20th century, particularly around activism, Black liberation activism, civil rights movement, peace movement, and a very in-depth collection. Du Bois lived for about a century. You should learn more about Du Bois always, I think. So I won't be able to do him justice here, but next slide, please. We have oops, that clicked. That was a link, active link on my slide. So if people find these slides later, you can get to our repository. So I might have to go back.
1 second. I'm gonna figure this out for everybody.
I can keep going. The collection there we go. So
okay. Sorry about that.
I think it's still.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Sorry, I shouldn't have linked that. If there's a way to hit like a space bar. There we go.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
So we have maybe 40 to 60 classes visit a semester, usually close to that 40 or 50. Undergrad as well, UMass students, 5 college students, and about half of all of our class engagements, I would say, involve the Du Bois papers to some degree, but almost all our class visits from younger students do, particularly 4th through 12th grade. This is partly because many of the younger student visits are organized through a different department in our library, the Du Bois Center, whose real mission is to disseminate, Du Bois's legacy and get out in the community and have lots of community engagement. So they also partner with these younger students, bring them to campus to come to their center, to do other things on campus, and often to come and see the papers themselves in our repository. But the adaptation for these students is quite extensive. I think getting probably some of the questions that Helen was being asked is that these can be more sensitive conversations with young folks, because Du Bois is engaging basically in activism against, race-based oppression, race-based violence, sometimes really traumatic materials that he's researching, that he's writing about. And we don't shy away from that in any of our classes, but it does take some adaptations when we're thinking about how to work with younger students. So next slide, please. So I've sort of split this up into things that we think about before class and the things that we try to do in class. So we do make different collection selections for younger students. Not, completely, but more than I do with any other student base. Try to limit or have no handwriting, or really, have transcripts, or have a really good reason for putting that type of material out. Try to extra emphasize things that are visually interesting or exciting to handle. Try to pick a lot of known genre types, and I'll talk about that a little bit in terms of pulling students in with things that they recognize. And then we focus on slightly different categories and stories in the Du Bois papers. We're still thinking about him as an activist and talking about his activism, but really presenting that for students in terms of thinking about that activism is open to anyone and all the different roles and ways you could think about engaging with trying to make change in the world. And then we usually also emphasize a lot more Du Bois as a person in his family, right? As a son, they might be somebody's son, as a father, and his place in Massachusetts. We have students come from his hometown in Great Barrington. So we emphasize that place, and also think about presenting Du Bois closer to their age. So emphasizing his time as a youth and his time in school. And then we put out a lot more descriptive labels often in these classes than we do, with older students. So next slide, please. So here I think are some examples. So this would be, a sort of setting place. And again, this is Du Bois obviously as a young child. If we have a group coming from Great Barrington, which is the farther west circle here, they're about an hour and a half maybe to Amherst, saying, here's your trip, and here's where, these materials, some of them originated in your hometown, but they've come to Amherst, and sort of get a sense of where we are, and also have some visual materials out for students. Next slide, please. So here's an example of materials we would put out for his family. And we can use these materials to talk about heavy subjects, right? We can look at this top right photo is Du Bois with his high school class, and he's the only student of color. If we can look, zoom in on the Father's Day greeting cards and the birthday cards that his daughter Yolande, who's next to them, is sending to him, that's pretty normal, right? Students might have gotten a card for their dad for Father's Day or for a family member for birthday. But we can also zoom in on the families on these that are depicted on these items. And Du Bois, Yolande Du Bois was only able to find a birthday card with this sort of nuclear white family to send to her dad for Du Bois. So we can have conversations with these materials, but they might be something that they're more, relatable. There's a Valentine to Du Bois from his granddaughter. All of our students are familiar with Valentines. So we can use these more familiar items to sort of get into conversations. And we show him, right, he's on vacation, he's with his family. To try to humanize this person, and that this is not always about this great man or these great thinkers. That archival collections are really exciting, especially because they can show the full, human side of some of these people. So next slide, please. We do that with Du Bois's activism too. These are materials we would use in any class, but we really emphasize all the different things he's doing, right? In terms of maybe you're marching, maybe you're starting an organization, maybe he's giving speeches, maybe he's running for the Senate. The first time in his life, he ran for the Senate, like in his 80s. Maybe he's getting signatures for people, writing journals. We have the menu out from when they started the Niagara movement, and students, we can talk about when you go to a restaurant, Do you and all your friends sign the menu? Probably not, right? That's a way into thinking about that they were documenting this legacy, and try to show all the ways also that they were engaging with young people, that the NAACP was recruiting young people. It had young people in its marches to try to connect it to that way and show them the ways that this was had breadth. His involvement had breadth in terms of the generations involved and breadth in terms of the activities that he was taking part in. So not skirting these heavy topics, but finding some ways into them that might be a little more relatable to younger students. So next slide, please. I think this is my last example, is also thinking about, what's visually exciting and talking about, we pull materials from this grand pageant that Du Bois wrote for thousands of actors on the stage, celebrating sort of Black history coming out of Africa and into America. And think about creative work, and we can ask them, right, if you were going to write or make one kind of thing to try to make a change, what kind of thing would that be? Would you put on a big play? Would you film a TikTok? Would you, do something at your school? Would you organize a food drive? So we can talk about the different ways he's trying to make change, and a lot of his creative work, I think, is one that students really get pulled into. So next slide, please. Oh, I linked that too. You all can go to all the great images in my PowerPoint. I'm sorry, this is my bad, Liz. So then during class, what do we do with these things? So we do spend a longer time introducing to students like where they are, right? Thinking about, well, maybe you've been to a library, maybe you've been to a museum, but then we talk about archives. We give them a longer introduction to Du Bois than we maybe would in a class that was coming with some prior knowledge. We have a longer discussion about the language that they're going to see in these collections. I can somewhat avoid potentially pulling really violent images, but I cannot avoid outdated language in the Du Bois papers. They are going to see language for Black folks and for African Americans and other groups of people that are outdated. So we have obviously a discussion about that. We try to have really simple warm-up activities to get them going, to get them up and moving. I think that's a trend you've seen in some of these, and I'll have an example of that. We build in way extra choice into these classes in terms of never demanding, like you have to sit and stay at the table with the stuff at this table. That was random. We give more movement, letting them swap. We have extra adults around. No one sort of talked about that. A class size that I would teach alone with undergrads. I always almost teach with colleagues. I think one of my colleagues here, Caroline, should be giving this presentation instead of me. She's one of our youth experts, but having, whether that's their chaperones or us, sort of doubling the number of eyes and people. So, students aren't eating things without you're knowing it. And then we try to often have a handout in these classes or some sort of guidance that they can take around with them in case they lose an adult to write. And these guidance handouts sort of emphasize some of those things I was mentioning about the collections in terms of really poking them to think about, how does this translate to your own life? How does this hit into your interests? So next slide, please. Just quickly, some of the examples of what I was just talking about. So we'll do really simple warm-up activities, like with just 2 photos, and students are used to a compare contrast. They can maybe see this little heart on a screen, right? Du Bois with all Black colleagues down at Fisk, his first time really being in a major Black population when he went down to school there in Tennessee. And then we have him with his Harvard graduates, all men, unlike the other photo, all white, unlike the other photo. And so we can pick out some of these things and have these discussions, hopefully with really simple warm-ups of like, here's the type of questions to ask of these things. And photographs probably are not something that's foreign to our students. And then this is a quick example of some of the questions, obviously not all of them, that we would have in a handout. And again, you can see we're trying to get at, what are the tactics that you're seeing? How did Du Bois try to make change? And they might see a march, they might see, again, him running for the Senate, they might see him doing something else or writing a play. And then we asked them, right, you're an activist and you were working, what role would you want? Would you want to have been a dancer in the play or someone who's being a musician? Would you have wanted to be out on the march? Would you rather be an editor working on the crisis? And think about all the roles that we have talked about, and then think about what type of sources, if you had been there working at the crisis in the office, you would have made it these kind of resources. And those are primary sources that we have over here from those people. If you were someone that is involved, in some other way, here's the type of resources that you would have created, to have them start to think about their own generation of primary sources with Du Bois and these conversations as a tool for that. And I think that's my last slide. You can go to the last slide, just some thanks and some links for you all. I think we'll get these slides up probably shared. And so just links to our department, to the Du Bois Center, which I mentioned, which we partner with a lot, and then some other material from us. So yeah, thanks everybody, appreciate it.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Blake. Really, I'm just thrilled to be on this panel. This has been awesome so far. I think I've got ideas from all three of you that I'm going to steal right away and adapt for us here at UT Arlington. So, my name's Evan Spencer. I'm the Outreach and Instruction Archivist at the University of Texas at Arlington Special Collections. So I just wanted to give a real quick overview of our K through 12 program, if you can even call it that. In 2021, the libraries hired a K through 12 librarian for the first time. So this person kind of handled all the outreach to schools and the logistics for the field trips. So unfortunately, I can't really speak to that side of things. And extra unfortunately, the university has decided to shift gears and centralize that. So we no longer have a K through 12 librarian. So I don't really know where we go from here, but I'll talk about what we've done so far. Since 2022, we've had 8 school trip visits actually show up. We had a few more scheduled that buses didn't show up or something happened and we had to cancel. They had to cancel. We average about 75 students per trip. And I want to note too that these trips are usually like campus visits or library visits as a whole, and they're coming to special collections as a small part of that. So I have not had the opportunity to do, several hours of, sort of engaged activities with these students. It's usually like 30 minutes, and the most time I've had with one single group is probably about 45 or 50 minutes. So we're doing quicker sort of, one-off activities with the students. So basically, I'm just going to talk real quick about 3 different activities that we've tried. I think they would be pretty easy to iterate on. The first one, oh, I don't have control of the slides. Next slide, please. Sorry, I'm like hitting my button here. So the first one, I'm sure most people here are familiar with the National Archives of the United States photograph analysis, document analysis worksheets. Basically, to be real brief on this one, we just select a few photos from our collection. I agree with everybody who's talked so far that visual seems to work better with younger kids. And so we have 4 large tables in our reference room, and I picked 12 photos. We had about 20 students per group, so they had some choice. And then we paired them up to work on their their photograph analysis worksheet. And so, I tried to pick relevant topics, right? We have a really great collection of photographs from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram here, really covering most of the 20th century history in DFW. So, things like JFK's visit to Dallas and Fort Worth in 1963, we've got photographs of that. So, most kids are at least familiar with who JFK is and kind of know the significance of that trip. But then things like, sports photos, national figures like Martin Luther King, things like that. The great thing about our Star-Telegram print collection is that they also have captions with them. So there's some additional contextual information. If I were to use something that didn't have those captions, I might go ahead and like print our metadata out or something to just give them a little bit of information, because I think, they might be missing some of the cues. But basically, if you're thinking about using this worksheet, I highly recommend it. The National Archives has different levels and all that stuff. The first group, so my takeaways from this is that it was a very mixed experience when I ran this with the 5th graders that I ran it with. The first group of about 20 kids, like, they did not care at all. They were like not engaged. They were, and so I'm sitting here kind of panicking, like, I've got another group coming in 5 minutes. Do I change something? How can I make a change here in the 5-minute like timeout that I get? But I decided to just, hey, I don't actually have time to do anything, so I'm just going to run it the same way a second time. And the second group was like the complete opposite. They loved it. They were asking questions about the archives. They were taking their kind of 25-minute period with me and saying, oh, what are those books over there? What about that map on the wall? Can I look at that? And it's like, yes, this is what I'm going for. So my takeaway is kind of like, don't let one group of 5th graders convince you that you're off track. Sometimes, you know, these kids were from the same school, from the same class. They just happened to be broken up into two different groups. That one was kind of very disengaged and sleepy, and the other one was super into it. So next slide, please. The next activity that I want to talk about is a map scavenger hunt that I've run, I think, 3 different times. Once with a 5th grade group, once with a 10th grade group, and then once with a library summer camp that was, the theme was like fantasy camp. So they were like building, I think they were going to build a Dungeons and Dragons like experience for themselves. And I wish I could talk more about that, but that was all the library folks who did that. So they came to me to see like world building, right? They wanted to look at real maps to kind of get a sense for how to create their own map. So what I did, very similar to the photo activity, was selected 12 maps from our collections dating back to the 1500s up to the 1900s, and in different languages of different places, and featuring, if you're familiar with early modern maps, they've got weird cartouches, people riding on crocodiles and stuff on the Africa cartouches, for example. And so, the idea is that the students go around and they find each of these parts on a map. So they're learning how to identify the different parts of a map, whether it's in 16th century Portuguese or if it's in English that they can actually read. They can still identify these things visually. And then just a little bit of critical analysis at the bottom. Again, this is like a 30-minute activity. So, tell me the subject of your favorite map, and then why do you think it was made? I need to figure out how to tweak that a little bit, because they usually just say, oh, for, to like navigation, or to tell about this place. But it's like, we did have some that went a little bit further and said, oh, this is showing like colonial possessions and stuff like that. So, and then doing the sketching activity. And I always stress to the kids that, like, I'm not an artist. If I were to draw that crocodile, it would look like a stick crocodile. So we're not judging you based on your art skills here. It's just, the idea is like, find something and kind of, hopefully it will stick with them more if they engage. So I know we've talked about drawing earlier in the session, so I love doing stuff like that. So this activity went really, really well with the 5th graders and the fantasy camp. They were super into it, and that camp was, I think, about 8 years old to 12 years old. And so in that age range, it worked really well. They really liked seeing the maps. They were very respectful of the materials, and kind of stayed engaged the whole time. The fantasy camp then went out and drew their own map based on what they had seen. And then the 10th graders, it didn't go well. I think it was just too simple for them. They found all the stuff in the scavenger hunt almost immediately, and then we're like, all right, we'll just sit here and look at our phones. So I think if I were to do this again with an older group, I would definitely like focus more on the sort of critical analysis side for older students. And then next slide, please. I'll try to go really fast so we can answer some of these questions. There's a picture of them doing it. Next slide, please. Sorry. So the last activity, I kind of talked about it yesterday in another session, the makerspace section. But today I'll talk about it from like the K-12 perspective. So this one was a little bit more designed up front. It was still a quick session, but I worked with our makerspace coordinators and then our K-12 librarian to develop an activity that would really hit like the Texas history standards for 7th graders. So, most of us in the US at least have those standardized things that all the teachers have to hit. And so we looked into that a little bit and built the session around, they need to understand these different time periods, especially in that like 1830 to 1850 period where Texas went from being Mexican to an independent nation to annexed by the US to at war with Mexico. A lot of change happening. They're really supposed to understand that in 7th grade. So we had an exhibit called The Shifting Shapes of Early Texas. They came and did a tour of that exhibit with the exhibit's curator, our former cartographic archivist, and he really nailed down that shifting time period through these 3 maps, which were prominently featured in the exhibit. And then the students then switched, so we had 2 groups, and they switched and came out to our library atrium and actually got to create a print of these 3 different maps. So the work we did ahead of time was kind of getting the scans formatted into the wood blocks that were printed on our laser cutters downstairs in the maker space. They also 3D printed that printing press that you see there. If you're interested in that, I talked about it more, and I think that recording will be up at some point, the makerspace presentation from yesterday. But they had to then, roll the ink with the brayers, apply the ink to the plates, and then create their own map that, really demonstrated that the shape of what we call Texas has not always been the same. It's shifting. The idea of what Texas is has changed. So they got to learn their TEKS, their Texas, whatever that stands for, educational standards. And then, but they also got to learn about printmaking and how maps were actually made. So I love this activity. I wish that I want to do it again and again and again, but like I said, we're kind of up in the air with our future in terms of K-12. I need to meet with the university folks, but I don't know. So, but that's my time, and yeah, hopefully we can get to some of these questions.
Okay. While we're going through chat, does anyone have a question that they didn't put in chat that they want to ask in person?
No, there's so many questions, I don't know where to start. What we can potentially do is try to get ones that don't get answered into the notes, and like, if I see one that I didn't get to, I'll try to go in and, maybe not today, but sometime soon, put in some little notes and answer to people.
Okay, I see one for Helen here at the top. Can you say more about how you support having challenging discussions with students of this age?
Yeah, I think what it's always very driven by them and what they bring up, and a lot of times we have very diverse classes, so students come from very different backgrounds, and so I think part of it is modeling how you want them to engage. So that is always kind of upfront, that I'm always honest about who I am and the what I bring in terms of my privilege and my biases, and so I think that kind of level of honesty when you engage with them creates that kind of trust. When we talk to teachers about it, then obviously part of it is creating that kind of space in their classrooms, a safe and brave space, I've heard it called. But obviously we don't have that time to build that rapport. But so that is one way, is to kind of model how we want students to engage, but also and to be honest, and to set very clear ground rules about how we engage with each other on these topics in a constructive way. And also, one thing that we do point out, and which actually the archival material shows us, is that we are all more connected in our society than people think we are, or some people think we are. So, we can show a slave ancestor of prominent white Afrikaans families in the Cape. And so those kind of conversations we try and have as honestly and as frankly as possible. But we also do, as part of the reflection, what I started doing is a kind of an exit ticket, so we can also take the temperature of where we have landed in some way, and sometimes I do follow up with teachers around that. and where they maybe want to take it next.
Thanks, Helen. There was a question for me too. How did the partnership session with the school come to be? Did you reach out? And I'm going to tie that in also to another question about, have you had the chance to have students tell something from their own stories using some of what they've learned? Big timing issues, I would think, but have you had a chance to work with the teachers to have pre or post continuations once they're back at their school? So for that first part of that question, this was actually two GAs, or two teaching assistants, graduate students who were in this class that approached me because they knew me, because they had come to class in special collections on their own for another class, and they loved coming. And so they just asked me, hey, would you ever reach out and work with K through 12? And I was like, yeah, I work with K through 12 all the time. And these students were in a class that they were going to Kirkwood to work a lot with the students on reading and writing. So there was already this established relationship that then I got to be a part of. That program is actually in danger right now of being ended because of funding. So I am working to say no, 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 no. And if something happens, I have been drafting proposals to the university librarian to be like, this is so important and we have to stay connected to the school. I would love to do it with this program that's already out of the English department as much as possible. But I am gonna still try to find ways to work with them because I've enjoyed it as well. And I think it's really beneficial. Having them tell their own stories, I have not explored that. And Matt, I loved that idea though. And I would really be curious to see if we continue to work with this English class that's going over there and working with them when they're reading and writing, if we can work with them to establish that in pre-visits so that when they come over, because we have such a limited time, I think that's a brilliant idea. And I would love to explore what that could look like. So that's a great question or comment.
I'll just say, oh, go ahead. I was going to say quickly, I think there's a lot of chat in the chat about, you know, where people hold these events, if people are traveling out or having them in their spaces. And I'll just pitch, this might be a great conversation either for a fest next year or for like the after hours situation. I think it's just going to be diverse across the field in terms of what people are able to do. I think hearing more about how people are making traveling kits. I think we don't have enough of time to get to today, but that would be a really robust and interesting discussion. I know people are taking them out. I posted one. We have a little sort of museum in a box type thing. It would be fun to get to that conversation sometime when there would be enough time to hear from a lot of perspectives.
Yeah, and I see I have a question from Lisa. So I mentioned we had a K-12 librarian, and so the wonderful thing about that was that I did not have to do any logistical planning. She approached the classes, or the classes approached her. She was the point person for all communication about buses and lunchtime and, you know, all that stuff. And now the school still had to coordinate the bus payments and all that stuff, but it was her job to plan out the session and what they were going to do on campus as a whole. And then she and I worked closely together to say, okay, what can they do in special collections that will enrich the experience? Or for seventh graders, like, this is specifically they're wanting a Texas history trip, so let's have them come visit the exhibit. So she knew that exhibit was happening and started pitching it to the seventh grade classes in Arlington and the neighboring cities, you know, a few months ahead of time to say, hey, in October, you can start visiting this exhibit and it'll be open and we can do events and or activities surrounding that. Not having one, this shift was just made. So, you know, between semesters. So our last K-12 group organized by the K-12 librarian was in May. And now moving forward, like, that's not her job anymore. So if she gets, if a teacher reaches out to her, she is supposed to funnel that through the university office now. So it's kind of like, this person worked one floor down from me and was heavily involved and came up to special collections all the time. And now it's going to be somebody I've never met yet, who I don't even know who they are at this point, at this moment in time, because I just found out about this last week. So it's very unknown what impact that will have, but it's going to be, you know, I just need to do the work of getting in with the person who's going to be bringing classes to or K-12 groups to campus, and it may end up being the same, but it's losing a person who's like in the library, embedded, knows what we're doing, knows what we can do, you know, was already aware that we could partner with the makerspace and make something really, really special for the kids, versus somebody who's not familiar with the library, doesn't know anything about special collections, and I've never met them before. So it's just, it's unknown at this point, but it hopefully it'll work out. But I you know, it's unknown.
I think we've gotten our time warning. So just, it was really fun to be on this panel and to see all the questions. I think there's a lot of energy around this topic. It might even be worth exploring, like people who are trying to do this really all by themselves, or people who have partners across their campus or at their university, you know, at their location. That might be another thing, but thank you, everybody. Thanks, helpers, Cynthia, Matt, everybody else, note takers,
and I'm happy.
panelists.
I think all of us would be happy if you reached out, because I know we didn't get to everyone's question. So if you want to reach out, please email me. Happy to continue. Yeah,
and we'll get some links to this recording into the slides. We'll doctor up those notes as we can. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks for the teaching, guys.
Thank you.